Andrea, okay?
Yeah, she said she had an emergency in the chat.
Oh,
And
okay.
We're live.
okay, good. So who's hosting this anyway? Is you Ryan or is it
Yeah,
us?
I can host if you
All
would
right.
like. I have a few questions. I prepared a few questions. Sorry for the delay, everyone. But we're all good now. No, I'm very excited to be talking to you both. This is my first election in 18 years of voting that I voted outside of the corrupt two-party system. And a lot of that was when I had a very just open and honest conversation with you, Angela, on my podcast. So I want to thank you for that, and I want to thank you, Howie, for being in this fight against the duopoly. Because I've only been I kind of had my big awakening about 6 to 8 months ago, and I can't even imagine like what it's been like for you guys fighting against this system and being used as a scapegoat by the two corporate parties when things don't go their way because they didn't campaign and earn people's votes. So I'm grateful for this opportunity. I want to start off by saying, look, for my entire voting life, the Democratic Party's electoral strategy has been fear, right? Their message is never like, vote for us because a better world is possible, where everyone has healthcare, housing, basic income, and a habitable planet. Instead, their message is always vote for us or a democracy that doesn't exist will die, right? Or vote for us because Republicans are more evil. And I remember, in my first election, celebrities were wearing those T-shirts that said vote or die. And it's like, I don't want to vote or die. I want to vote and live in a better planet. I want to vote and live in a better world. How have the Democrats been able to maintain this charade for so long in getting people to settle for the lesser evil? And how do we break out of this cycle of lesser of two evilisms that we've been stuck in for decades?
Well, I think we got to build it from the bottom up. Presidential elections are high stakes and they focus on the green candidates. They lie about us being spoilers when in fact the Democrats in Florida in 2000 or Michigan in 2016 didn't even fight for an election they actually won because they seemed more interested in the legitimacy of the two-party system and letting the Republicans bully them than actually fighting for the people that voted for them. So we got to build it from the bottom up. We've elected over 1,200 Greens over the years, about 100 in office now. We should be electing thousands in the next few years to local office and from there to state legislatures and Congress. And then it won't be possible to ignore the Green presidential ticket. I think that's really, and the left has to stop going inside the Democratic Party and disappearing. They maybe support progressives in primaries, but when they lose, they end up doing the grunt work for corporate centrists like Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden and their counterparts at every level. And so the left disappears. So while they may say we want Medicare for all, the candidate that gets the nomination isn't for it, and they go, oh, well, at least they're not as bad as the Republicans.
Right.
And so 100 million people didn't vote in 2016. Disproportionately working class, people of color, young people who aren't apathetic, they're alienated. They're disgusted with the two-party system. So we need to build a party that's organized at the grassroots level so these people know us, know who we are personally, and they trust us. And we provide a place where they can get engaged in, a local chapter of the Green Party, and where they can see us make advances at the local level and get confidence that we can take on the national power structure. So those are a few thoughts on that question.
Yeah, one thing I've noticed, especially this cycle, is because the left has nowhere to go, really, like because obviously they should come over here, right, and vote green, but because there's not really a major left party already in our government, we've watched the Joe Biden campaign, in a moment of just massive levels of injustice and inequality. he's ran a campaign in the general election where he's shifting right, when he should be shifting left to policies like Medicare for all or a Green New Deal or universal basic income. But he's going to the right and pandering to kind of, moderate Republicans. And I think that the reason they take our votes for granted is because the left keeps allowing them to, right? The left, we've got to start to organize, come together, and stop allowing this corporate party to take us for granted. Because so long as we don't have anywhere to go, or so long as progressives, like you said, Howie, keep falling for it, then it's just going to be the same thing. There's no competition against the Democratic Party, so the left kind of just buckles and caves. That's kind of how I saw it this cycle. Angela, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, yeah, and you and I touched on that, when we talked, and it's just, yeah. I mean, there's so much. I think the biggest thing coming out of this that is like completely huge is just the momentum around needing an independent left party and how badly we need it. I think people who have not, paid attention to it, really been involved in it, oh, I'm not political. Well, baby, get political. Because here we are. I think people are waking up to that fact, or acknowledging the fact that it's time for a left party. The left to have its own independent moves. And so, I think folks fall for thank you, David. Life is political. Come on. Just thinking about the fact that people have been so conditioned, and we are working against decades of conditioning. That's right. To think, with this binary. And I think people are finally, noticing that neither side of this coin really cares about the things that you are caring about. And they're making it obvious. They used to at least try to hide it. They're not hiding it anymore.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that you just said, that they're making it very obvious. I mean, the DNC had an opportunity this year to actually to make some serious reforms that the people are calling for, right? The DNC Platform Committee had an opportunity to make some changes within the structure of the DNC. And guess what? They voted against those changes. The DNC Platform Committee voted against rejecting corporate PAC money. The DNC Platform Committee voted against banning corporate lobbyists. So they voted against, making the things that are corrupting our democracy, right? Corporate greed has corrupted both parties. And so if the Democrats are going to participate in the same corrupt system as the Republicans, then how are they going to save America? They keep saying you got to vote blue to save America. How are you saving America if you're participating in the exact same corrupt system that the Republicans do, and you're taking money from Wall Street? In fact, this cycle, Wall Street has given more money to Democrats than Republicans. So, how are you going to solve all these big crises we face if you're just catering to your corporate donors and not representing the people?
Yeah, that's
they're not interested. Oh, go ahead, Howie.
I was going to say, they are who they are. They've always been that way. Christine Pelosi snuck in a thing that they won't take money from oil and gas PACs in June 2018. Must have been at the end of the meeting when everybody's tired and not paying attention, because the chair of the DNC made sure at their next meeting in August that not only are they going to take that oil and gas money, they're recommitting to the all of the above energy policy, which means fracking the hell out of the country for oil and gas.
Right.
Nuclear power for the first time in 50 years, the Democratic Party is for nuclear power. And I looked up, why is Biden so interested in nuclear power? And I looked up who the Nuclear Energy Institute executives, which presidential candidates they gave money to. They only gave money to one candidate. That was Joe Biden. And, nuclear power, when you talk about climate change, is such a dead end. Solar and wind, most forms of it are 2 to 3 times cheaper than nuclear power. And, under Biden and Obama, they gave loan guarantees to 6 new nukes in Georgia and South Carolina, 4 of which have been abandoned for cost overruns and construction delays. And the only 2 they're throwing money at still are in Vogel, Georgia, because Brian Kemp, as Secretary of State, suppressed the black vote, stole the election, and he's a creature of Georgia Power and the Southern Company. So, you know, they got a climate plan that is a disaster. You know, like say, Trump calls climate change a hoax, but Biden acts as if it's a hoax. And,
yeah,
you know,
I have a question about that later. You're absolutely right. And I think what the following the money is key. That was one of the things that helped wake me up. And the reason I voted green this cycle is when I realized, like, you know, Democrats will go on TV and say climate change is real, but then they won't fight for or support a Green New Deal to do something about it, right? And the reason is because the fossil fuel industry is one of their biggest donors, you know. And then look at the healthcare debate. You know, Democrats will go on CNN and say, you know, that healthcare is a human right, but then the majority of the party, all the corporate Democrats, including Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi, don't support Medicare for all, and it's because the giant insurance companies are one of their biggest donors. So when I started to kind of connect the dots, and I know most of people probably watching already connected those dots, but I hadn't. Like, and I think that's important because I think here we have these two parties that for the last half century have not been representing the people of this country. They've been representing their powerful special interests in Wall Street and giant corporations and the billionaire class. Yet the American people keep electing them. You know, it's like sheep going to the slaughterhouse. I mean, it really is. And so I try to kind of lay out in kind of plain terms, like why I voted green this cycle, and connecting the money and letting people know, like, look, they're not fighting for policies for you because they're fighting for their corporate donors. And when people see that, they're like, oh, okay, they start to get it a little bit better.
Yeah, I think most people vote not for their own party, but against the other one.
Right.
It's negative partisanship. You know, Biden's people aren't in love with Biden. They just hate Trump.
That's true. And
the Trump people got the idea that the Democrats are coming to take their property and burn their suburbs down.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's really frustrating for us because we're trying to talk about life or death issues, climate change, inequality with working class life expectancies in decline. And we have an economic bill of rights to end poverty and economic hardship. And the new nuclear arms race hadn't even been mentioned. In fact, the whole question of U.S. imperialism and the bloated military budget, no discussion. It's the most
because both parties are parties of war that support these endless wars. So that's why they don't talk about it. They're both in, you know, they both support the defense industry and, you know, the military industrial complex. So it never comes up.
Well, if we had an independent media, you know,
right,
they could force a discussion of it, but that's a big problem. I mean, we've been totally blanked out. And so that's what explains it. You know, it's like people voting against the other side. They're not really voting for their side.
Right.
Even among, you know, a lot of Trump people don't like Trump. They maybe like a few policies, his tax cuts or his anti-abortion position.
Yeah. Sometimes it's important to kind of look back so we can kind of understand what happened in 2016 to kind of move forward. And one of the things, you know, after 2016, rather than take accountability for losing, Hillary and the Democratic Party blamed everyone but themselves for their loss, right? They blamed Russia, they blamed Bernie, they blamed Jill Stein, they blamed the Green Party, they even blamed Susan Sarandon. And this is, I think, one of the worst, is they blamed the very voters who they took for granted during their campaign. You know, they tried to make Jill Stein and the Green Party into these supervillains. And I have to admit, you know, that I kind of fell for it initially after the election, even though I was a Bernie voter in the primary. You know, that's how powerful the propaganda machine is at the DNC. And I actually apologized. I made an apology to Jill Stein, like, I don't know, a few months ago, just saying, like, I'm sorry, because plot twist, turns out Jill Stein and the Green Party, you guys are the heroes. You're not the villains of the story. You're actually fighting back against the duopoly. You're fighting back against these two corrupt parties who have a stranglehold, you know, over our government and who use our government to enrich themselves and their corporate donors while we, the people, are paying the price. So, you know, and the other thing is, like, you win elections by offering voters policies that will improve their lives. You know, the reason I'm bringing all this up is that here we are 4 years later, and the DNC still hasn't learned this lesson. They're running another neoliberal corporatist candidate who doesn't energize progressives or working class voters, and who is not offering the bold policy changes that this moment calls for. They have doubled down on their message of fear and vote for us, like I said earlier, because Republicans are worse. And they're probably going to get away with it because Trump is such a historically bad president. What was it like to be blamed for the Democratic Party's failures? And what does it say about the future of electoral politics when the American people go along with this charade of blaming voters instead of blaming the politicians for failing to give us anything to vote for?
You asked how it feels. I mean, I know what happened in 2016. Clinton didn't even fight for her own election. It was Jill Stein that sued to get the votes in Detroit, over 70,000 of them counted, because the Republican Secretary of State had put in defective scanners. So they were set aside, never counted. And the Republicans and Trump were arguing, well, they shouldn't be counted because they weren't scanned and something fishy's going on. But the judge said, well, maybe they should be counted, but the Greens don't have standing because if we won every one of those votes, Jill Stein wouldn't have won Michigan. The Clinton lawyers were in the courtroom and the judge turned to them and said, you could have standing. Do you want to get involved? And they said, oh, no, we're just observing. Now, the margin of difference was just a little over 10,000 votes. Those 70,000 predominantly Black Democratic voters in Detroit voted for Clinton. Their votes were never counted. And the Democrats have the gall, including Hillary Clinton, to scapegoat us.
Right.
I mean, she went on David Plouffe's broadcast and said with authority, Jill Stein is a Russian asset with no evidence. And in fact, now we have the U.S. and the Senate Intelligence Committee report looking into all these things about Russian involvement. And the section on Jill Stein describes what she did. It was all above board. She paid her own way. And they preface it by saying Jill Stein did nothing wrong. But you can bet that the Democrats will still call her a Russian asset. And whatever happens in this election, Biden could win. But if he loses a state and the number of votes we got is greater than the margin of difference, they're going to blame us, saying we spoiled the election. And the fact is, we know this from 2016, exit polls showed that 61% of Jill Stein's voters would not have come out and vote if she had not been running.
Right.
We bring new voters to the polls. And what are the Democrats doing? We know about Republican voter suppression. The Democrats suppress a political party.
Yep.
Running for office is the fullest expression of the First Amendment. Free speech, petitioning the government for redress of grievances, free press, if we got any. And they are suppressing a political party. And they tell us to be worried about Trump's authoritarianism. Hey, we're worried about the Democrats' authoritarianism. Because we submitted in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Montana 2 to 3 times the number of signatures we got. And they got us knocked off the ballot. So we're afraid of both parties. I guess that's the way to sum it up.
Well, I mean, you bring up a good point. Like, you're not, the Democratic Party isn't, quote unquote, saving democracy as they claim, by rigging their own primaries, like they have kind of 2 election cycles in a row against the most progressive candidate, kicking the Green Party off of ballots, like what's happening this cycle. And just this, and also this cycle, they've taken more money from Wall Street in 2020 than the corrupt Republican Party. So, like, how are they saving democracy when they are acting, all those activities I just described, they are authoritarian, the same way you described them. Like, they are just as big a part of this problem as the Republicans, but it's almost like they have a much better PR, a PR system, a better PR department than the Republican Party. Cause it's like, how do people not see this? Like, why aren't people waking up and seeing, like, vote blue no matter who? Democrats were saying that in the primary before they even picked their candidate. They're like saying policy doesn't matter. That's like an authoritarian slogan, like just vote no matter who. Like, no, it's like democracy is about choices. It's about people getting to vote for who they think will best represent them. But the Democrats just want blind obedience. They don't want anyone to think for themselves. I've been attacked relentlessly for supporting the Green Party for the first time. Like, I mean, you should see the things they come up with. They come up with the most unhinged fake conspiracy theories because I just refuse to vote for a party who doesn't support democracy and doesn't support the policies we need to move this country forward. Enough of them, because we've established that the 2 corporate parties are corrupt. Can you guys outline the Green Party's platform and why it is better than the platform for of the two corporate parties?
There's so many reasons that our platform is better. And that's not me talking smack. It's the doggone truth. I mean, as someone who gets up and goes to work every day, just like everybody that I know that is able to work, I know a lot of people who are not able to, and that's a whole nother thing. Folks who would benefit from our policies. Everyone I know, as I wrote in a recent, I got quoted saying something, but it blurs. But I need these policies personally. Everyone that I know and everyone that I love needs these policies. I mean, this is extremely personal to me. So when we're talking about healthy housing, retrofitted buildings so that these are healthy buildings that are not, exuding carbon into the atmosphere, these are things I need. When we're talking about the revamping of wetlands, restoration of forests and, replenishing our actual land, those are things I need. Those are things that matter to me very closely. Medicare for all, absolutely. As a community-controlled national health service, that benefits everyone. No one is being turned away from a hospital because they need care and can't pay. Right. That goes out the window. That right there is massive. I lost both of my parents to cancer. And part of the reason that they waited to go to the doctor as long as they did and took Excedrin and just acted like they weren't in pain is because they couldn't pay. So, these things are personal. The fact that, we're talking about free public education from pre-K through college. Do you know how many working parents this would help? How many young people who want to further their education? I mean, these are not just policy pieces. All of these things, I can tell you how they impact people I personally know, how they impact me myself. And for, a party, because I don't rock with the Republicans. So when I'm talking about folks, I'm not even referencing them. Even though we've been called Republican assets this year, which is absolutely hilarious. I'm like, baby, you reaching, stop it.
Yeah.
Stop it.
I'm a Trump supporter because I voted for you. That's what they call me. Like, are you kidding? I'm to the left of Joe Biden. I'm like, Joe Biden has more in common with Trump than we do, right? Like on the political scale, like their agenda is much more in line.
It's like, y'all can't decide whether we Russians or Republicans. Let me clarify it for you. We're neither. So, you got it here. We're neither.
We're Americans who want a better life for everyone, a life of dignity.
Explicitly socialist. So, and I was just asked, Howie and I were just asked in an interview we did earlier today about the way that, the term socialist gets thrown around as an insult. That's not an insult to us. It's who we are. And that's what this platform is. And it is about the health of the planet and the health of people. And I support everything about it.
Would you like to add anything, Howie?
Well, I think one way to put it is we're for a Green New Deal. Biden and Trump are not. We're for Medicare for all. Biden and Trump are not. We're for ending the endless wars. Biden and Trump are not. We're stopping the deployment of the destabilizing new nuclear weapons. And Biden and Trump support deployment of those weapons. And then as far as the socialist piece goes, that's how we get real solutions. Take our eco-socialist Green New Deal. If we're going to get to our goal of 100% clean energy and zero to negative carbon emissions by 2030, which the climate science indicates a rich country like the United States has to do and needs to do to set an example for the world, we got to have public enterprise and planning in key sectors, particularly energy, transportation, and manufacturing. There's no way you can just use market incentives and subsidies to make the kind of transition we got to make. It's got to be coordinated like it was during World War II, when the federal government took over a quarter of the manufacturing capacity of the country to rapidly transform industry into what they called the arsenal of democracy, to arm the Allies against Hitler, Tojo, and Mussolini. we need to do nothing less through the public sector to deal with this climate crisis. And in this time, even the progressive Democrats can't fathom the idea that the government should directly employ people and make the goods and provide the services that the people need.
Right.
It's all trickle-down economics, whether it's Trump's tax cuts or Biden's more targeted tax cuts and corporate subsidies. And it doesn't trickle down because the demand isn't there, and rich folks take their money, and instead of creating new productive assets and jobs, they make financial investments in stocks, bonds, commodities, real estate, and just rearrange and further concentrate who owns the productive assets we already have. Excuse me. And then the other thing, and we talked about this, U.S. imperialism and the bloated military budget are not even up for discussion. So we have peace initiatives that include 75% cut in military spending, getting out of these endless wars, withdrawing from our over 800 foreign military bases, pledging no first use of nuclear weapons. And then with tensions reduced, going to the other nuclear powers and say, we want to implement this new treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. It went into effect this week for the first 15 nations that signed it. Who knows that in this country? Because it's not being talked about.
Right.
So that's the direction we got to go. And, we're trying to put forward an alternative. But like I said, we're not going to get the coverage until we build a political base, a foundation in local offices and then state legislatures and Congress. That's how we're going to force our way into the discussion. And of course, you get into the debate, that's half the battle.
Right. Yeah. And I think that, I think they use socialism, especially the corporate media and both parties, to kind of scare people away from any change that would benefit communities of color, the working class, or the planet. It's like this scare tactic. And it's like, look at our system now. I mean, one of my big epiphanies in the last 2 years is when I finally realized that, like, oh, shoot, like America isn't failing because of one corrupt president. America is failing because our entire system is corrupt. Like you said, Howie, for the last half century, we've had failed trickle-down economics for the working class. And, we've had Wall Street bailouts, subsidies, and tax breaks, and pretty much socialism for the ruling class and these giant corporations. And it's just created a country that is unequal, and we're all at each other's throats. And I think people are kind of struggling to understand that it's like, we need socialism to save capitalism from itself. Capitalism is it's eating itself. It's eating us. It's eating our planet. And I wholeheartedly believe that it is time to transition away from a predatory capitalist economy that is killing our planet and our people, and that it's time to transition toward an eco-socialist economy that will begin to heal our planet and our people. Howie and Angela, how do we bring more people along who seem to be clinging on to capitalism for dear life, despite the fact that it's failing the majority of us?
One thing that's been helpful to me in talking to people about socialism is just talking about issues. A lot of people are frightened when they hear socialism, and we all know why. You hear the word, you've been red baited in this country your entire life to think that socialist and communist are things that you need to be afraid of. But when you start talking, particularly, in a lot of sectors, because Black folks, we are not a monolith. Latinx folks are not a monolith. Indigenous folks are not a monolith.
The LGBTQ community is not a monolith.
People ain't a monolith.
We are not.
So that's a whole nother discussion in and of itself.
Yep.
Like, I have to remind people all the time, I stand at an intersection. Right. I am working class, cisgender female, Black, queer, and a socialist at the same time. But that's a whole nother show. That's a whole nother talk. But when we're talking about it, we just have to stick to the issues. Show people how socialism actually has been something that, at least in the Black communities in this country, we've built things on this in the past. This is not a new concept for us. We've been doing this, and just sticking to how that looks rather than, because you need theory, of course, But before you give people theory, you know, you need to show them why it benefits them. This concept, how is it, showing up in your life and things like that. That's how I do it.
Yeah, I think getting people involved in fighting for things like Medicare for All and the Green New Deal educates them as to how the power structure works.
Right.
How all this nice talk, lip service, particularly from Democrats, is a bunch of BS, because in the end, they're answering to their donors and not the people that voted them in. But beyond that, we need a mass-based party doing political education, a place where grassroots people can go to local meetings and become smarter, talk to each other, read stuff together, become better speakers and writers, because we're going to have to be smart to beat this ruling class. And there's no place for people to go now. Democrats and Republicans are memberless. You say you're enrolled in this or that party, and that's so the state knows which primary ballot to give you. But if you got a problem in your community, you don't go to your local chapter of the Democratic Party. They don't do that. And then in the larger political milieu we're in now, it's, a lot of single issue nonprofit groups. And behind them are some very rich people fund the nonprofits, hire the staff. The staff decides what the next move is. And then we get the word from Move On or whoever what the next move is online. We didn't participate in that. And of course, they're formulating agendas that are, maybe national or statewide in scope, but not at the community level where, a lot of people are engaged. So we need local chapters where people can participate, and we need to have our own media, and we need to start putting up, socialist leaders that can speak in a common language.
Right.
I mean, right now, all the socialists we got are on campuses. They're writing articles for each other. And when you follow the footnotes, you run into a paywall, if you can even understand their jargon.
Right.
We need to break it down so people can understand. And, I'm really disappointed in our so-called socialist intellectuals in this election who told me to drop out or don't vote for, me and Angela because we got to settle for Biden. It used to be a socialist principle that working class political independence was the first principle of socialist politics. And that voting for the capitalist parties was as bad as crossing the picket line in a strike. And instead, all our, socialist intellectuals, you can think of the names, you know who they are. They're saying, cross that picket line and vote for the world's second most enthusiastic capitalist party. So, we need to, throw some new leadership up there, because what we got now is not helping. They are basically telling the left to surrender their flag, their identity, their own independent existence, and go work for a bunch of capitalist Democrats.
Yeah, you know what? I've started reading Hunter S. Thompson, who I'm sure you're familiar with, and Angela is familiar with, and I started reading him about 8 months ago. And one thing that blew my mind is that there's a piece he wrote in like 1972, and he literally says that the Democratic Party uses this lesser of two evils argument to get elected instead of pushing for the meaningful change that we need to heal this nation. And why it strikes me so much is that was 50 years ago, and that article could have been written today, right? Because here we are 50 years later, and the Democratic Party is still, vote for us because we're not as bad as Republicans. And so they're still asking people to compromise their values. When you say that, socialist leaders are saying we should compromise, we got here by compromising. We got here by compromising with, these two capitalist parties. And, the other part of his article that really struck me is he's like, the Democratic Party needs to implode, because the problem with the Democratic Party is that it occupies the space of where a true people's party should be. And that to me is kind of what made me realize, like, I can't vote for Joe Biden this cycle. Because look, if we keep doing this, if brave people don't stand up and speak out, and if the Howies and Angelas of the world don't campaign against these corporate parties, it's 50 years from now, if we still have a planet left, the DNC is going to be asking people to vote for the lesser of two evils in the quote unquote most important election in history. Like, there's no end to this until the people demand an end to it, until we demand better. And it does. As someone who's kind of radicalized in the last year, it breaks my heart to see how many people have just kind of compromised their values. Because look, the DNC is going to take what they're going to take from this election cycle, because I do predict that Biden will squeak by and beat Trump. I think they'll say, oh, look, we beat the Republicans without having to give one major concession to the left, without having to offer Medicare for all or a Green New Deal or UBI, So they're going to say, well, we can just keep moving right, and the voters gave them permission to do that by not holding them accountable. So I just don't see any other option but to leave these two corporate parties and start building up third parties like the Green Party. What are your thoughts on that, Angela?
Well, actually, I am watching the chat because I got a whole lot of folks I care a whole lot for in this chat. And one of the things that keeps coming up, Ryan, especially around when we're talking about, building an independent left, is what Zimani is asking. And they've been pretty consistent asking that. And it's legit. When we're talking about building a left unity and left solidarity, where are we? How's that going to look? And, it's not going to be something that, and Howie and I have said that from the beginning. It's not an expectation that everybody's going to hold hands and sing Kumbaya and we're all on one page. There's a lot of diversity among, the ideologies and approaches of folks on the left. The left ain't a monolith either. So Zimani is asking us, why doesn't MPP consider joining the Greens? How can they combine their efforts?
I think that was my last question on the thing, because I do believe, I spoke at the People's Convention. They asked me to speak, and one of the things, someone that's been a lifelong Green reached out to me and was like, look, we've been organizing for 30 years. Like, we've been doing this work, what about us? And, MPP, the People's Convention was the policy they set forward for the first convention was they didn't want to have any current candidates because it was like an introduction. But I agree with the people in the comments, and I agree with you. Moving forward, the reason I supported you guys this cycle and pushing the Green Party is because when that person said, well, we've been doing this work, what about us? I said, well, you're absolutely right. And so I wanted to start building that solidarity by having you on my show, Angela, and by coming out and saying, like, I'm voting for Howie, I'm voting for Angela, like, I'm voting Green. Like, I don't care about all these, people in the establishment that are going to, I think I've lost like 12,000 followers since I announced that. And guess what? I don't care, because when I finally woke up, it's like, I go hard. When I'm convicted about something, I'm like, I am done with the DNC. Like, I am done with the establishment. So like, I could lose all the rest of my followers, and I'd know if I'm fighting for what I truly believe in, that it's going to be okay. So that is what I think needs to happen after this election, is that we need to build a broader movement after this cycle, a solidarity movement, if you will, to unite everyone who, on the left or independents and working class Republicans into one united effort so we can beat the corporate duopoly in 2024. I agree. And I don't know what that looks like. I don't know if there's like a solidarity task force that we set up next year. Obviously, like, I was just asked to be a speaker, at the People's Convention. I think it's exciting, that effort as well. But I agree with you. We do need to have a united effort if we are going to break the duopoly in 2024. So, if that's a task force next year to get, all the, the party of socialism and liberation. And I don't know what it looks like, and I don't want to overspeak because I'm not an authority figure. I'm just an activist who's so exhausted by these two corporate parties, and I'll do anything and build any bridges so we can really, really beat the duopoly in 2024. What are your thoughts on that, Howie?
Well, one of our themes of our campaign was left solidarity. Angela and I are also the nominees of the Socialist Party USA.
That's right.
We have the endorsement of some independent socialist groups, some local chapters of the DSA, the Legal Marijuana Now Party in Minnesota, Student Loan Justice. But the other way to look at that is you could get all these groups in an auditorium and it'd be tiny compared to that 100 million people that didn't vote in 2016.
Right.
Who would be the base for a left party, working class, people of color, young people. So how this party is built depends on who goes out and actually talks to those people and builds relationships and trust and organization in those communities. That's why we need a mass-based membership party with local chapters through which these people can get engaged. So I think that's the key. I mean, we did talk to the Movement for People's Party leadership last spring, and the door's open from our end. They did exclude us from their convention. I've heard some of their leaders say, well, we're too far to the left or something. But, what matters is who goes out and does the real organizing. And as a child of the New Left, I go back to Johnson and Goldwater. And the slogan then from SDS was part of the way with LBJ, because Johnson was seen as a warmonger. But who escalated in Vietnam and created that, terrible situation? It was Johnson. Of course, the Republicans supported him. Our foreign policy and militarism is bipartisan. And so I've been hearing, this is the most important election. The Republican is going to be the end of the world,
right,
since I was a teenager. So, what'll matter is who goes out and organizes and builds a real grassroots organization. And as a child of the New Left, I think we got overimpressed with what we did with street demonstrations and civil rights and anti-Vietnam War. And one thing the old left could do is build mass organizations. And so we have episodic demonstrations and mobilizations, but we don't have that ongoing organization. So when we mobilize the usual suspects, but we don't build out to that 100 million people that we need to be organizing. So for me, that's the key. We got to be organizers, not just activists.
Another thing I think is key too, though, is, when you look and see how popular leftist policies are, the majority of the country, 70% now supports Medicare for all. That includes a lot of independents and Republicans in there. The majority of the country supports a Green New Deal. The majority of the country supports, universal college. And so the majority of the country is leftist, actually. It's just this kind of corporate media apparatus that confuses people with fear mongering and propaganda. And of course, our two corporate parties who, we have a Republican Party that's basically almost a quasi neo-fascist party now. And then the Democratic Party, which is not a progressive party. It is a corporatist party, that talks progressive on TV with platitudes, but doesn't actually support these policies. But the reason I'm saying this is I do think that, to break the duopoly in 2024, moving forward, we have to have solidarity with all working class people. We have to and we can do that without watering down our policies, because the polling shows that the majority of the country supports leftist policies. So and what's weird is, since I have my little independent podcast that I started a year ago, it's like I hear from 5 to 10 Republicans or former Republicans a week saying like, dude, you call yourself proud socialist. And I relate with you. Like I'm with you. Like working people need more power. If all socialism means is, of, by, and for the people and giving working class people power and not more power to the ruling class, then yeah, I'm a socialist, So I think that we're trying to fight these battles of kind of we're trying to come at this system that's been scaring people away from socialism for the last 100 years. And meanwhile, capitalists are just, we've got 2 billionaires who now own more wealth than half the country. So I guess the point I'm making is, moving forward in 2021, we've got to have a way to have solidarity with working class people who voted Republican in the past, because I think that is so important to beating. I mean, we're not going to beat the duopoly, unless we can unite working class independents, Republicans, and leftists, in my view.
I agree. And I'm just thinking also, the real work, quoting, a podcaster I just spoke to recently, the real work really does begin after the election. It's like, yeah, you voted. Now what you ready to do? It's great that you voted, but the real work is making sure that, there's still a pandemic happening. How many of our, the infrastructure, as health infrastructure, we don't have Medicare for all. It is not in place. So how are we taking care of our people? How are we, in our communities helping to stop the spread of COVID? How are we supporting families that have young people who are needing to learn virtually but don't have access to the technology or don't have access to the material they need to do that? How are we, making sure that people are not going hungry? How are we doing these things? And these are things that we do. So, and also like Howie mentioned earlier, the knowledge sharing. We need like mass education in this country on the history of the left.
Right.
We need that, because people who don't, haven't come up with that or haven't been taught that really don't realize how extensive our history is, particularly for people of color. So we've got to do knowledge shares. We've got to do skill shares. We've got to, continue the mutual aid efforts, broaden those mutual aid efforts wherever they're happening. So, left solidarity, I said all of that because y'all know I go around the world with it. But I said all that to say that left unity will be more important after this election than it has ever been. And we are going to have to be intentional about it and, be ready to work with one another. We don't have to agree on every point, but where do we agree and how do we lift those intersections up and take care of our people?
Well, very well said. And one thing that just struck a chord with me when you were talking is about this, why, leftist history has been erased because the Democratic Party keeps co-opting or destroying leftist movements, and that's one thing that really opened my eyes in the past year, is seeing like how many, social movements that the Democratic Party has destroyed, because they co-opt the language of the progressive movement, by saying things like, healthcare is a human right, because they want our votes, but they don't support our policies and Medicare for all to make healthcare a human right. Or they'll say Black Lives Matter, but they won't support, defunding the police and shifting resources into Black and brown communities. Like we said, they'll say climate change is real, but they won't support a Green New Deal. And so I think the Democratic Party, again, it's speaking truth to how corrupt they've been, how they have, we saw this election cycle, right before Super Tuesday, 3 days before Super Tuesday, Barack Obama makes a phone call, asks, Pete Buttigieg and, Amy Klobuchar to get out of the race and basically clear a path for Biden, and that kind of stuff, they've been doing that for decades. The other thing that I was going to ask is, I'm having a brain freeze.
It's okay.
It happens, right?
It's okay.
Yeah, I just had a little brain freeze. Anything else? I was going to say is another thing I learned about their whole co-opting. I learned this year that the Democratic Party didn't even come up with the Green New Deal. The Green Party set up a Green New Deal task force, Green Party International, and I think it was like 2007, to create the Green New Deal. And yes, AOC kind of popularized it, but their version is more watered down than the original version the Green Party came up with. Do you guys want to kind of distinguish the difference between the original Green New Deal that the Green Party came up with and the Green New Deal that AOC talks about on TV?
I'm gonna leave it to the original Green New Dealer to handle that one.
Yeah, I was the first candidate in this country to campaign for a Green New Deal, running for governor in New York in 2010. And it was coming out of the Great Recession, an economic recovery, as well as a climate action plan. Because Governor Cuomo, the leading Democrat, wanted to cut education and healthcare, freeze hiring, add a fifth tier of crappy public pensions, which basically became 401ks. And, so we said, this is the Hawkins prosperity plan versus the Cuomo austerity plan.
Yeah.
And so it became the signature issue of the Green Party in the next, last decade. Jill Stein, our presidential candidate, ran on the theme of a Green New Deal for America in both 2012 and 2016. We ran on it 3 times in New York. And the fact is, AOC's campaign manager, V.G. Ramos, was a campaign manager for a Green/Socialist candidate for city council who campaigned on the Green Party's Green New Deal. So that's where she got it from. Now the Sunrise Movement organized that sit-in in Pelosi's office with AOC there, and then it went viral. But then they demanded a select committee on the Green New Deal, which Pelosi wasn't having because they could have put legislation right on the floor. And Pelosi wanted to run it through her people who would kill it. And so they came up with the non-binding resolution for a Green New Deal, which diluted they took our slogan and diluted the content. They eliminated the ban on fracking and new fossil fuel infrastructure. They eliminated the phase out of nuclear power. They eliminated the transfer of resources, human resources and capital, as well as cash from military spending to the Green New Deal. And they extended the deadline from 2030 to 2050 to get it done. And then Pelosi never let them vote on it in the House. So much for the Democratic Party as a lesser evil. And then McConnell said, well, we're going to put all you Democrats on the record because half of you in the Senate are running for president. And Schumer and Markey, who co-sponsored that non-binding resolution, said, oh, this is a trick. We're going to vote present. And all the Democrats voted present, except 4 of them voted with Republicans no on this watered down Green New Deal. And now it's totally buried. They didn't mention it in the Biden-Sanders working group or unity working group on climate. They didn't use the phrase. It's not in the Democratic platform. And Joe Biden, who used it when it was popular, even though his plan was nothing like what we're talking about, it was pathetic. He's running away from it, as he made clear in that first debate, if anybody hadn't been paying attention. So Biden's climate, let me just finish with this point. Biden's climate plan is a real climate bomb. It's pro-fossil fuels. He talks about carbon capture and sequestration. That's not going to happen. It's not economically viable. But that's a cover for fracking the hell out of the country for oil and gas. And then they want more new nuclear power plants, which, have failed in the recent ones they tried and cost more than, for the same money, you can produce a lot more solar and wind power. And then one of the few specifics they put out was, we're going to retrofit 5 million buildings for energy efficiency and clean power in the next 4 years. Well, there are 120 million buildings in the country. At that pace, it'll take 150 years to clean up the building sector. That's not a climate. I mean, that's why I say Trump may call it a hoax, but Biden acts as if it's a hoax. There's no Green New Deal or climate plan coming from the Democrats. That's where we're at. So,
I mean, the fact that we are in a climate emergency, would you say that Joe Biden that it is a form of climate denial? The fact that he'll say climate change is real, but that's just a platitude, right? Platitudes aren't going to stop the climate crisis. Is it a form of climate denial to know what's coming, to know the crisis we are in, and not support a Green New Deal, not support a ban on fracking, and also they aren't even ending fossil fuel subsidies for oil companies. They originally had planned to do that. That was in the DNC's platform. It mysteriously disappeared. So now they're going to continue the fossil fuel, continue subsidies for big oil companies. Is all of that is all that climate denial? Basically, not taking the bold action that we need to take at this moment.
I think it's a good way of putting it. Reminds me of Malcolm X talking about the Democrats and Republicans. One's a wolf and one's a fox. That fox is, sly, but he's going to eat you too.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like with the Democrats, it's like they're supposed to be our allies. And that to me was like the hardest thing for me to wake up. It's like, it's almost like there's a bad guy out at your front door and the bad guy's the Republicans, and your friend who's with you in the house opens the door for the Republicans and lets them in your house. Who are you going to be more angry at? The bad guy who is coming into your house, or your friend who let them in the door? And that's, again, why Democrats are so frustrating to me. They're supposed to be our ally, and time again, they're not. They stab us in the back, whereas Republicans, we know the blade is coming. I know who the Republicans are. They talk on TV. They're brazen. They're like, yeah, we're going to war. Or, yeah, we're cutting taxes for billionaires. They're very open about their corruption. But the DNC and these corporate Democrats, they're sneaky. And I think it confuses people because, look at someone like Barack Obama. I voted for him twice, and he sedated us with platitudes of hope and change for 8 years. Come to find out, he was governing for Wall Street, giant corporations in the billionaire class, and income inequality grew under Obama's presidency. But you wouldn't know it if you were hearing a story, because he's a good storyteller. And you wouldn't know it if you're listening to the platitudes. So I think there's this like disconnect in that the Democratic Party isn't who they say they are, or they're not who they play on TV. It's almost like they're an actor telling you like, no, we're the good guys. Come to find out, like, there is no good guys in our government. They're both bad. This isn't a fairy tale. It's like in a fairy tale, you got a good guy and a bad guy. It's like we're living in a nightmare and they're both bad.
And the thing is, they know that about us. This is a culture that is all about spectacle. Right. We are all about being entertained. This is bread and circuses. And just like, because it's a reference to the way they did business in ancient Rome, it's like, keep the people busy, right. Keep them entertained while we do what it is we want to do. Do you think these people don't know that? They know what our weakness as a populace is. We have short memories. We want to be entertained. We want the fiery speaker. We don't give a damn whether you have any substance behind what you're saying. Right. We're not going to listen that deeply, but we want, make us feel, even though it's not going to last. Give us something to get excited about. And at the end of the day, as a populace, now I'm not talking about all y'all woke folks on the left that I'm looking at in the chat. Before y'all go in on me, you already know who I'm talking about. So, a lot of us are not, I'm not political. Those folks that, we need to stop treating politics in this country like it's a spectator sport. When it's great to cast your ballot. That's something you're moved to do. But also, once you do that, be prepared to shut down public meetings, public hearings, to show up, to get those streets, to visit people's houses. Whatever it is you need to do to remind these folks that they are supposed to be working for us. Right. And we don't do that until something egregious happens. And then all of a sudden, for about 10 minutes, we're mad. And then something else comes along. We have got to be ready to be, the re-education piece that we talked about, but also stop letting these folks be rock stars. Cast my ballot and stand back. You got it. No. Get ready to hold them accountable. They're expecting us not to. They've gotten comfortable with us not holding them accountable. And it is our job to hold them accountable.
Yeah, I agree. This whole worshiping politicians thing has gotten way out of hand. It's like we're not supposed to be worshiping politicians. We're supposed to be holding them accountable. One thing I want to ask you guys is, I feel like the main reason the duopoly stays in power, or has for so long, is they're really good at keeping us divided in these two teams, the red and the blue. And it's like they get the 99% fighting each other. And, liberals are so busy fighting conservatives that, it distracts people from the bigger picture, that while the 99% is busy fighting each other, our politicians are rigging the system for the 1%. And I see the way politics in America kind of moving toward is that the real battle anymore isn't liberal versus conservative or Democrat versus Republican. It's the people versus the oligarchy, right? Or the people versus the machine. Because I do think they keep it's like, look, there's a new poll this year. 57% of Americans want a new major party. So the need for it is there. People want it. Yet we're broken down in these two factions that, like, people think it's only Coke or Pepsi. And it's like, no, there's Sprite, there's Mountain Dew, there's Evian water, there's all these other things. And we got to get people out of these factions, because I think that's how they keep their power, by keeping us divided and keeping us fighting each other. The working class, for instance, we shouldn't be fighting each other. They're the ones that are screwing us up above. Howie, would you like to speak on that? Just kind of the way the duopoly stays in power?
What you're describing is the most effective way to capitalists stay in power. It's much more effective to have two capitalist parties than a one-party state where you're being bamboozled.
Right.
You got two parties, the illusion of choice, and they talk, crap about each other. It's all negative partisanship. Most people vote against the other party rather than for their own candidates. But everybody gets all worked up on that. Both parties agree on economic policy, on foreign policy, on environmental policy. and they divide us on the cultural issues, which are very important. But that's how they get people mobilized and riled up and think the other side is evil.
Right.
And you were talking earlier about how we got to reach out to working class Republicans. And, I've found, once you get beyond the labels and they know you personally as a candidate or as an activist with a party, and you talk about specific issues, then it's like, well, how do we solve the problem? Not, I'm a conservative, you're a liberal, or I'm a moderate, whatever, or I'm a Democrat, or I'm a Republican. I mean, I've worked on campaigns to kick out the investor-owned utility and have a public power company here. I've worked with people that weren't just Republicans, they were in the Conservative Party in New York. And some of those conservatives were also for Medicare for all. Because it just practically, a single public payer is a lot more efficient, and we all need health care. And I'm worried that, when I retire, I won't be able to make the bridge to Medicare from the job I have now. So you get beyond those labels and talk concrete things, and then the solutions are pretty obvious. And it is, it's a class issue. It's the elites are making money off this system, and the rest of us are getting screwed, getting ripped off. I think we can explain to people that think they're for capitalism, your property rights are being violated. When you go to work, you get a fixed wage, but you create more value than that wage. And the owners of that company take your product, what you created. They're stealing your property. Capitalism is a system of organized theft. And I think we got to, break it down like that so people begin to realize how the system works. That's just like popular socialist education that has not been done in this country since the heyday of the Socialist Party. And that's what we got to get to. And I think we can speak to all kinds of folks that consider themselves, Republicans or conservatives or whatever. We just got to get the personal relationship. Also, when you run for local office, once they know who you are and you're from the community, then your party label doesn't matter. People use party labels as shorthand. They don't know who's running. Donald Trump could be on the Democratic ballot. And most people are going to vote for him because he's a Democrat now.
Yep.
So that's, I think, what we got to do, talk to people. That gets back to organizing and not just mobilizing.
Yeah, no, I think
it worked for David Clark. I had to throw that in there. It worked for David Clark for years. The Democratic Party knew what this cat's politics were. And he ran as a Democrat forever. And nobody ever called him out on it. So, yeah.
Until you did. Explain who he is or was.
Oh, David Clark was the former sheriff of Milwaukee County. And he's a black guy. Those of you who watch Fox News and subject yourself to that. Strong stomachs. Salute. But for those of you who watch, he's the pundit with the cowboy hat, black cat, that hates black people. I ran against that man in 2014 as an independent socialist, and we pulled 20% of the vote from him in Milwaukee. So when you're talking about Democrat, like what Howie just said, you could run Trump as a Democrat and like people are like, oh, I'll vote for him. He switched over.
Vote blue no matter who.
Thank you. The Democratic Party knew what David Clark's politics were, his rhetoric was, his stance on, policies was, and no one ever called him out about the fact that you're telling people you're a Democrat, because the only time that you're trying to appeal, you say Democrat, it's a dog whistle in black neighborhoods. Black guy, Democrat means vote for me, even though you are like the epitome of some really bad stuff.
Yeah. What would you say to someone? Someone said to me yesterday that I wasted my vote. And I told them that I didn't think I wasted my vote at all. I think that, I don't like to get in the business of voter shaming because I feel like that's all liberals know how to do since they don't stand for anything. I feel like since the Democratic Party won't fight for the policies we need to move this nation forward, all they do now is attack and shame and blame voters who are actually fighting for the policies we need. But I just told them, like, I don't think any vote is a wasted vote. But what would you say to someone who identifies with the Green Party and wants Medicare for all and a Green New Deal, but their friend is talking in their ear and saying that that's a wasted vote and don't bother? What would you say to a voter like that?
It's a wasted vote to vote for Biden if you're for Medicare for All and the Green New Deal. You just voted against those things. Your vote,
Amen.
your voice, it's your power. Use it. Don't throw it away and waste it on somebody you don't agree with.
And something I like to tell people, like when they're voter shaming, it's like, sweetie, take that energy that you are wasting on me, that you are wasting on green voters and green supporters, and go round up some of them 100 million people who abstained from the vote in 2016. Go out there and beat the bushes for your candidate and leave us alone because we're good.
Yeah. No, I said the same thing. I said, from my point of view, a wasted vote is a vote for either one of these two corporate parties because they're both failing the country right now. I think we're nearing the end. What have you guys? I want to ask this to each of you. Howie, what have you learned about America, and what have you learned about yourself in running for president? And then I'll ask the same thing to you, Angela.
Well, I think there's a political vacuum out there. You know, when I think about the fact that what we're campaigning on has majoritarian support on our key demands, and that's not getting translated into the political system or into public policy, which comes back to we got to organize a third party, and we can't do it out of a presidential campaign. I mean, what we're fighting for is trying to get discussion of these issues and winning enough votes in the 40 of the 50 states that will secure us a ballot line for the next election cycle. But what really matters is what we do after the election, going back and organizing, running local candidates, start electing thousands of them so we got a foothold in the political system. And then I think it will be hard to ignore. So that's a position I've held for a long time, but I'm more convinced of it than ever, having gone through this campaign. And what I learned about myself, I hadn't planned to run for president. I got drafted. So I guess I learned I could actually do it, at least, carry the message out there. I had a lot of help from, I have to say, the campaign team I work with is the most coherent and mutually working well together campaign I've ever been involved in. I've been involved in a lot. So we plan to continue organizing around these issues, helping local Green chapters develop, and helping local Green candidates win elections. And our organization is going to continue around the things we were fighting for during the campaign. And, we want to help the movement develop. So, I guess that's what I'll be doing going forward.
And Angela, what have you learned about America, and what have you learned about yourself in running for vice president?
I've learned that people around the country are ready to talk about socialism in a way that they were not in 2012, in a way that they were not in 2016. They're ready for it now. And that gives me hope. It gives me a lot of hope that people are willing to organize. Like, let's make this happen. Because a lot of people have been affected by COVID in such a way as I think it opened a lot of people's eyes and their hearts to how this government has failed us. And that this is a bipartisan failure. Right. And that the people you thought were coming to save you are not. We are our own saviors. Mimi Soltysik and I said this in 2016. No one's going to save us. We will save us. And so I think with this campaign and with this platform that stands on human dignity, that stands on the need to be good stewards to this beautiful planet. And that's not rhetoric. I live in South Carolina. It's one of the most magical places I've ever lived in my life. I want to protect this planet in every way that I possibly can. And so just thinking about how many other people feel the same way here in 2020 in the middle of everything that we're dealing with. I want to hold on to that because I could tell you a whole lot of really horrible stuff that I know about this country. But the most beautiful things to come out of this is what I want to focus on, and how many people love this planet and are genuinely invested in protecting people. And what I've learned about myself is resilience in a way that, you know, like Howie, I was drafted. When he called me, I thought all he wanted was an endorsement. Like, yo, you know, we know each other. We talked about the Green Red Alliance years ago. Where you at with this? Nah, and what he wanted. So here I am. And I think what it's taught me about myself more than anything else is that, you know, one of my goals for this year personally was to love bigger. And I have been forced, my heart has been forced to expand through this. And, you know, my skin thickened. So, you know, trolls, do your thing. But I'm more capable of bringing this message than I thought I was. So.
Very beautifully said. Anything else that does anyone in the chat room have a question, or
I
do you
want
guys
to
have
tell
a question for me?
Oh, they got plenty of questions for you.
Oh,
No, not in a bad way.
oh, okay.
Not in a bad way.
Ask.
And I'm shouting out my South Carolina people. You know, Diana and Gada and Trayvon. What's up, people? I'm here. I'm here. I thought this was beautiful.
Z Manny just said, you all should do these talks regularly together. The discussion is very rich and it's valuable to reinforce this connection. It is. No, and me and you came on my podcast, and you said something that really moved me when you said that the American people have been settling for crumbs for so long that we don't even know that a better world is possible. And that is like what, you know, in my political awakening over the last kind of year and a half, that really is that, you know, that's what gives me hope, is that despite the corruption in our government, despite the fact that we have two parties that don't care about us, despite the fact that, you know, here we are in a crisis and a pandemic, and both corporate parties, the first thing they did is bail out their corporate donors in the billionaire class. And we've seen the richest Americans, they've earned now over $1 trillion, while the rest of us are just trying to keep our head above water. So, you know, just to know that despite all of that a better world is possible, and to see, you know, Angela and Howie to run this campaign and to fight against the duopoly, when you've got the media attacking you, and you've got the centrists attacking you, and you've got all the trolls online. I applaud your courage, and I applaud everyone in the Green Party's courage to keep hope alive and to keep fighting against this corrupt system, because we all deserve so much better than this. We all deserve so much better than this.
You see, Kenneth Terry is like, how are y'all so awesome? Because y'all are. I mean, we could not do the work that we're doing if we did not have y'all behind us. Like all of y'all that show up every week for our live streams, that are in our Twitters, that are, you know, when Ryan is getting the business from people who are hating on him, that we show up and support and you know, surround him. And the same with Howie, that we have each other's backs. We can't do this by ourselves, that it wouldn't happen. And so if y'all think we're awesome, it's because you are. And that's not, you know, me talking out of my armpit. I mean, I try not to say things I don't mean. If I don't like you, I'm gonna tell you I don't like you. But we would not be able to do this without you. This is a collaborative effort. Going forward, this is a collaborative effort, and we are going to need you to be in this work with us.
Beautifully said. Howie, any parting thoughts?
Well, I'll speak to this question. You know, how do we get more people of color involved in the party, but also in predominantly white issue organizations like the Sierra Club? Goes back to organizing. You know, the people that don't vote and the people that are alienated. People of color communities vote in lower numbers, except maybe when Obama ran, and they don't participate because they're alienated. And the left comes around, or the Sierra Club or whoever, and says, they preach, here's a leaflet, here's a public hearing, we need you, or come to this demonstration. And they don't know us. They don't trust us any more than they do the two major parties because they don't know us. So it goes back to organizing, building relationships, listening, building trust. And then, people of color will participate. And also, when you go out and organize, you find out what's going on in those communities and see how you can help and support what they're doing. That's how you build the relationships and trust. And it's, there are manuals on how to do community organizing, union organizing. Now, what I'm talking about is just old-fashioned organizing, is distinct from mobilizing activism. And that's what we got to learn. And like I was saying earlier, the left has forgot how to build mass organization, forgot how to really organize. It's all mobilized, and we mobilize the usual suspects. And then, like here in Syracuse, I go to the white side of town, and the white people say, "Where are all the black people?" at a meeting. And then you go to the church here on the south side, and the black people say, "Where are all the white people? Why don't they ever come around?" And the thing is, we don't know each other. We don't have relationships, and that's what organizers figure out and do. So I think that's what we got to do. We got to learn how to organize.
And I think community is missing from our politics, because you look and see how, there was a new report out 2 days ago that both corporate parties have spent over $7 billion now on this election cycle, on television ads, and $7 billion. It's like they don't care anymore. They just, they put expensive and flashy ads up on TV and social media. And there's, like you're saying, Howie, there's no organizing, there's no community building, there's no solidarity in either of these parties, because they just care about power, right? They don't care about policies that are going to help our lives. And they've turned our elections. When you see that they've spent $7 billion on ad spending now, they've literally turned our democracy into an industry, into a for-profit industry. And you watch these ads, what are these ads telling you? They're not telling you to vote for a candidate. They're not saying, vote for us, a better world is possible. They're saying, the blue part, the Democrats are saying, vote for us or democracy will die. And Republicans are saying, vote for us or Democrats are going to burn down the suburbs. I mean, both messages are fear. So they essentially spent $7 billion this cycle to just scare people and push communities apart. I got a brother who's a Trump supporter. And right after 2016, we didn't talk for 8 months. And I was so angry at him. And I'll tell you something really interesting. When I decided to leave the Democratic Party, 6 months ago, and the liberals started attacking me and they started spreading all these horrible things about me, this strange thing happened where I'm like, wait a second. The liberals are always complaining that the Trump supporters say all these horrible things, but here are all these liberals saying the meanest things about me. And what it ended up happening is it brought me closer to my brother, because I could see him as being a human. I disagree with his politics, but this idea that we should all be at each other's throat and fighting each other while the rich just keep getting richer. And basically we're just willing tools of the oligarchy and protecting their power. It's ridiculous to me. We have to bring back community. We have to bring back solidarity. We have to get away from this politics that has just stripped humanity from us. It's taken our humanity. And look, as Joe Biden said, nothing will fundamentally change if he's president. It's the most honest thing Joe Biden has ever said in his career. And he's absolutely right. So essentially, good job, Republicans and Democrats. Y'all spent $7 billion for nothing to fundamentally change. What a waste of money. You know what I mean? And not tackling any of the big issues we have, like climate and income inequality and racial injustice. And, it breaks my heart. So, I am just honored and humbled to be in solidarity with the Green Party and voting for the Green Party for the first time. And yes, I spoke at MPP and I support MPP's efforts too. Look, I support any effort organizing outside of these two corrupt parties. And I hope that moving forward, next year we can have like a task force or something to kind of have solidarity amongst everyone who wants to beat the duopoly in 2024. And I'm speaking off the cuff, but there's higher powers that be. I'm just a little activist here, but I do believe in solidarity, and I believe if we can come together, I believe I supported Bernie in 2016 and in 2020, and he almost did it. Bernie almost beat the system. He almost did, but he kept trusting the Democrats too much, in my opinion. Looking back, it was like, look what they did to him in 2016, look what they did to him in 2020, and he still trusts them. And it's like, I'm at a point now where I don't trust the Democratic Party anymore. I don't trust them to do the right thing. I trust them to do whatever benefits their corporate donors. And there's just no accountability in our government. So we got to keep building community and, doing this kind of work. So, we can have the government that we deserve, and we can have a government that works for human interests and not corporate interests. And I think that's the shift I'd like to see in our politics over the next 4 years and decade, shifting from a politics of, corporate welfare to human welfare, and shifting from a politics of corporate greed to human need and planetary welfare. Because right now we're on a road to destruction and on a path to ruin that doesn't, look very good with either of these two corrupt parties in power.
No, I was gonna say capitalist gonna capitalist. So, this is what they do. And we're at a point where people can make a choice. You have the right to choose whether you want to continue this walk towards oblivion or whether we want life. It's that simple.
Yeah, I think the lesson people need to draw of Sanders' efforts inside the Democratic Party is that he won as an independent many times, mayor of Burlington, Vermont, to Congress, to the Senate. And then when he ran in the Democratic primaries, the establishment closed ranks against him.
That's right.
So the lesson is run independent. You can win and you can carry your message to the general election. And I think where we're at right now is we got to make sure the vote is counted. If the polls are right, I think they're probably right. Biden's going to win, may have a Democratic Senate and House. And then our time is coming because the Democrats are going to disappoint progressives. So it's been a tough year. Anybody but Trump. We've all experienced that, but our time is coming. And let's get ready because it's coming. Yeah.
No, we saw what happened the last time Democrats had all three branches of government. They passed a Republican healthcare plan, right? From 2008 to 2010, they passed a for-profit predatory healthcare system and then tried to dress it up like it was the best thing ever. And it wasn't, right? I mean, that is the Democratic Party. So I think that I agree with you, Howie. I think that Biden is going to squeak it out. But I think that it's an opportunity because I just don't see them bringing the kind of fundamental change that this moment in history demands. Like, we're in a moment in history where, okay, fine, Democrats, you were peddling the status quo for the last 50 years. But in this moment, when there's this much inequality and this much injustice, and you're still going to bring the same old neoliberal corporatist agenda, like, that's unacceptable, and that's one of the reasons I left the Democratic Party. I just, the way they Biden wouldn't support Medicare for all, the way they treated Bernie, I just don't see that party. Once you see that party for what it is and you stop listening to their platitudes, you start to see that no real change is going to come from that party, and that's why we have to organize. And that's why we have to build power for the people outside of these two corrupt parties, like what the Green Party is doing. Yeah.
Well, yes.
Does anyone have any more questions from the audience or from the chat room, the comments?
I think the boss ain't giving us no more. But we'll be like, there's a lot of folks that were asking questions that Howie and I address on Tuesday too, like general stuff, policy questions. So y'all already know, just come back Tuesday and we'll take care of those. This was a special thing with Ryan today. So
thank you guys for having me, and go out and vote green, everyone. Go vote green. Let's break the duopoly and let's keep working together. Let's find that solidarity that we need to free this nation from corporate rule. because I'm tired of it.